All right, everyone, we are going to get started now with Stack and Sequence, building a capital matrix for brownfield redevelopment funding. I'd like to introduce our content leader for this financing workshop, Eric Williams, Project Director from SCS Engineers, and Dana Justice, Senior Marketing Coordinator from SCS Engineers. Please welcome Eric, and he'll get started with this excellent workshop. Thank you, everyone.
All right, let's get started on things. Thank you for attending. This is going to be a little bit different type of presentation. It's going to be a little more casual. I don't sit still very well when I talk, so I'm actually going to roam around the room and not be up on the stage. Also during this, I'm happy to take questions along the way if they're burning a little bit. I might put you off till later, but feel free to stick your hand up and ask questions along the way, and we'll try to have this be a little bit of a dialogue. Welcome. You're at Stack and Sequence, building a capital chart for brownfield redevelopment funding. This workshop was born out of conversations I was having with the senior C-Clear people about the fact that this conference and forums like it are really good at having speakers and presentations on very specific and individual funding sources, right? We always get great people from EPA and DTSC, and they speak to what they know very well, which are these individual funding sources. But sometimes what we lack or what we think might be needed is really how to integrate multiple funding sources and how they work on complex projects or overall brownfield areas. So this presentation kind of came and was born out of that idea. And with my background, which I'll talk to you in a little bit, we ended up calling it Stack and Sequence because all these brownfield projects require multiple sources of funding to get done, right? I think a lot of people appreciate that. A lot of people appreciate the concept of a capital stack, which is using multiple funding sources. But maybe what we lack a little bit is the understanding of how multiple funding sources can be integrated and not just stacked, but also sequenced. So work all the way along the full life cycle of a brownfield project, from the very initiation of an area or a site all the way through vertical development. And so that's what this workshop is all about. So with that being said, there's a number of things we're going to cover over the next couple hours. I want to start, by the way, I needed to introduce Dana. Where did you go? Oh, hi, Dana. This is Dana Justice. She's one of our national partners for Brownfield grants. Also one of the co-authors and co-creators of this workshop. So thank you, Dana. I'm going to call on her from time to time, and she's going to help us through the day. So these are the things we're going to go over. We'll do some introductions, including you all in a minute. And then I'll talk about the workshop overview. I'm gonna start us off, admittedly, with a passion topic of mine and a little bit of a tangent about how local government could do things to promote redevelopment. We'll talk about funding sources, and we'll dive into the funding matrix. The first half of this workshop is about the matrix. It's about a database of funding sources. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. Then we'll get into more of the concepts around stack and sequence. Once that's done, we're going to be through the first half of the workshop, and then we're going to do some exercises, and you all are going to build your own stack and sequence chart for scenarios that I give you. So in this, you're going to have facilitators sitting at your table. If you are a facilitator, will you please raise your hand? So almost all the tables have facilitators. We're going to set up a couple easels in a little bit, and after you do a little bit of learning and we talk through the concepts here, I'm going to give you some scenarios, and your group sitting at your table or two tables combined is going to create your own funding stack and sequence. So that's coming on the second half of things. And then lastly, because I'll forget if I don't say it now, we have office hours later today, I think at 4 o'clock in the East Wing, and same thing tomorrow. What office hours are the opportunity for you to come talk to me and us about your story and tell us your story, and we'll do our best to help you get started on a stack and sequence chart to get your project funded. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's go back and talk about introductions. I'll start with myself. I'll do this briefly, but there's a reason I'm going to tell you what my background is. I was talking to Mary Hashman. Did Mary make it into the room today? Mary's a board member of CCLEAR and also from Colorado, where I'm from. And talking to her reminded me that she and I are some of the few people that have been in the brownfield industry specifically since before brownfields was a term. So that takes me back to late 80s, early 90s. I know, shocker given my youthful appearance, right? But yes, I've been around that long and been doing brownfields that long. And there's not a lot of us left. And I was also thinking then, on a big picture, what changed over those, 3.5 decades of time when it comes to funding brownfields? And this is what I came up with. Back in the day, for the first couple decades of brownfields, projects were funded basically by using the economic engine that underlies the project, which is really the future value of real estate. So back in those days, the trick was to take this future value, this development potential that a piece of property had, and figure out how to leverage that to create some money up front to pay for the very tasks that it took you to get to that end. And so in the United States, across the board, some really high profile and cool projects got done. Waterfront stuff and stadiums and all the way across. But those, now that I look back, were relatively easy, although it didn't feel like it at the time. Back in the 90s, it was the Wild West of environmental liability management. It was a pretty crazy time. You know, CERCLA was 10 years old and RCRA 15 years old, Clean Water Act 10 years old. It was a pretty wild time back in those days, but the projects could get done if they had an underlying economic engine, and those were the ones that got done. The bad news was that a lot of others didn't. So marginalized communities, environmental justice communities, rural communities were left behind because they didn't have that underlying economic engine. That was the story of the time. But I will tell you, and part of the point around this workshop is that is different now. It is different now. Now, there is unprecedented amount of money that's coming into the brownfield world specifically to deal with these more difficult projects. Rural, environmental justice, marginalized communities. There is more money than there has ever been to help get those projects done. So it looks a lot different than it used to, and that's why this workshop was born. Back to my introduction, I spent the first half of my career as a consultant, and then I wanted to get into more of the financing and funding side of things, so I actually went to work for a California-based company, Continental Environmental Redevelopment Financial. Does anybody remember that from Sacramento? They ultimately became Enviro Finance Group. See, Ignacio remembers, of course. I know, that's funny. So I joined them when they were going national to become Enviro Finance Group, and we raised a few $100 million worth of capital to put out as debt. But it gave me a deep understanding at that time, this is now a couple decades ago, of what it takes to attract private level investment. And that is the goal of most brownfield projects. It's the goal of accessing grants and other financing sources is to attract ultimately the private investment that makes these projects go and makes them go all the way through vertical. Then I spent 15 years, up until a little over a year ago when I joined SCS, as a redeveloper of brownfield sites. So I would acquire brownfield properties, environmentally contaminated properties, take their liability, and then develop them to their highest and best use given environmental conditions. And through that, I ended up owning Superfund site, which I wouldn't recommend, corner gas stations, paper mill, industrial laundry, a bunch of different types of sites. And again, it gave me an appreciation for these three big areas of brownfields: real estate, environmental, and funding. I tell you all that because I do have this bent, I have this history about attracting private level investment. And it's really because I raised a few $100 million, maybe $500 million worth of capital over the 15 years for projects. And a lot of that most of that was private capital from one source or another. And so I know a little bit, or feel like I know a little bit about attracting private level investment to projects. So that's my introduction. Again, facilitators, will you just take a minute and just speak to your table and let people know who you are, so your name and the name of your company, please. So just amongst yourself, take 1 minute, introduce yourselves to the rest of your table. What's that?
We should sit at a table that has...
It will help. Yeah, you're welcome to be anywhere. I talked Jim into coming to this because he's going to help us out today.
And I work with SDS. How I got looped into this.
Yeah, that's how he got looped into it.
He's apparently part of it.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Let's go ahead and move on with the rest of the slides. I appreciate the introductions. We'll talk more on a break. Later show. Ignacio, you too, you have to wait for later. All right, we're going to move on. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for doing the introductions. I hope you got to know somebody at your table that you didn't know before. In terms of this workshop, here's what we hope you come away with. First of all, you'll get access to this presentation. You'll get access to the matrix. The matrix, I'll introduce more in a minute, is a database of funding sources. It is a living, breathing database that we've just created and will continue to work on over a very long time. I think we got up to, I don't know, Dana, 50 or 60 funding sources so far. It will get a lot bigger than that as we focus on other EPA regions and we focus on other states around the country. And SCS will be the keeper of the database but have access to it for everybody. So you're gonna come away with the initial matrix, and then in fact I'm gonna hand out a few copies and throw them out on some tables. You can kind of look through some physical copies for the moment. So you'll get that, and you'll get that database. But while I'm on the topic, I started thinking about how to do this the best way. And we started getting contacted already by other states, Tennessee included, that's starting a new state brownfield program. They want us to develop the matrix out for their particular state. And right now we focused on the Region 9 states, and even then heavy on California because this conference is so heavy on California. But I kind of figured out in my mind that we really need this to be crowdsourced information in a lot of ways. So you're going to get contact information for me. We're going to meet your facilitators here. Dana's another great resource. As we go forward and you recognize the potential for other funding sources to be added to the database, contact me, contact Dana. We're going to get it added. And we're going to find a way, I don't know exactly how yet, but to expand into other EPA regions and other states. So you all can be a part of creating this database that we all can benefit from. Okay, so that's why that's important. Also hoping you come away with an understanding of the application of stack and sequence, the concepts around stack and sequencing these sources. And by the way, the matrix or the database is individual funding sources, right? We're going to call those building blocks today. That's going to be important to the exercise later. They're going to be building blocks to developing your own and developing overall stack and sequence. And then we hope after this, you at least have some level of comfort to get started on your own projects and figuring out your own stack and sequence charts. I would not expect, unless you have pretty deep experience in this, that you're going to run off and become an expert. It's not the intention. But we will, in addition to that, provide you some contacts. We have office hours later today. If you contact me or contact Dana, we'll schedule a one-on-one with you, either while we're here physically or next week or whenever you might have the moment. So take advantage of this as an overall resource, and we'll work with you as we need to. So you're going to get the contacts for that. Okay, I promised you a passion topic. This is a little bit off topic, so bear with me for a minute. I mean, it's certainly related, but I spent a lot of time over the years working with municipalities and local government and talking to them about what they can do to attract private investment. So I'm just going to give me a minute on this or 2 minutes on this, and then we'll move on to the matrix. I always like to start about how private investors and developers look at how to and when to enter brownfield projects. And my experience is these are the major things. First of all, they want to understand environmental conditions. It's important that I use the word understand, that not they want to have knowledge of, not necessarily reduction of environmental liability, although that's number two, but just having knowledge of the conditions is environmental liability management. Being able to put a box around it and understand it is really important. And then those two things roll right into this comfort. The idea is that if private investors and developers can get comfortable, if they can put numbers on a spreadsheet, if they can draw a box around the liability and the cost of cleanup and other environmental issues, they can move forward and enter a project. They also want financial help. A lot of these projects are upside down, right? The property with the contamination is worth less than if it were clean. So they need to see at least these projects brought back up to level, to even. And better than that would be a good thing, because there's a lot, even after cleanup gets done, there's stigma and other things that have to be overcome for brownfield projects. And because I couldn't resist fast and easy, entitlement's not really related to brownfields, but all developers want that, so it's something that we can do. So then I thought, okay, what are some of the things that local government can do to help promote and accomplish those 5 things I had on the left? I came up with a laundry list. There's probably a lot more. I put them in a few categories. One of the first categories is funding and environmental liability management. Importantly, I put those 2 things together because successful brownfield projects really need to be looked at holistically, not in silos, not just real estate, not just environmental, not just money. They have to be looked at in an integrated fashion. In fact, I was reminded by seeing my friend Mike McLaughlin from SCS here that I spoke at the Brownfield Conference in Detroit last year on funding, and I used the metaphor for brownfield projects as a Rubik's Cube. And I did that because every time on a brownfield project you get new information or you make a decision, the cube turns. And every time that cube turns, it changes something else on the other side. It changes the dynamic. That's why the goal ultimately is to get the cube entirely lined up and look at things holistically to do that. So funding and environmental liability management go together. And it's because a lot of the funding does exactly that. It reduces environmental liability. I was also talking to my friend Jen Simon, who I'm going to introduce later, about encouraging municipalities to not be afraid to acquire sites themselves. There are certainly ways to do that and control that environmental liability associated with acquiring sites. And so there's things municipalities can do and local government can do to just on the ownership and control of sites to help attract that private investment. Planning, local government typically does well in my experience. And I will say, and I don't want to insult anybody in doing this, but almost to a fault sometimes. So sometimes I refer to the pretty pictures, the land plans that get done, the vision documents that get done, but maybe at times they lack what I call the business of brownfields. How are things going to get funded? How is the business going to get done that actually makes those pretty pictures come to life? And that's a lot of the other things that I've got up here. And then I specifically put in deal making as well, and I also had public-private partnerships not capitalized on purpose. And the point I wanted to make there is not all public-private partnerships need to be the capital P, massive, P3 projects. There's a lot of deals to be made. There's a lot of stakeholder involvement between private investors and developers and municipalities that can happen that allow these projects. And I'm going to talk about some of those in a little bit when we get into the matrix. Okay, off that topic for the moment. If you want to have another discussion about how local government can promote redevelopment, please contact me. It's a topic I love to talk about. Okay, let's talk about the matrix for a minute. So somewhere right here, you're going to, in a minute, probably on the break, we're going to pass out a few of these. This is a physical copy of the matrix. It doesn't have all the columns in it. But the way that we set this up, we had to figure out a way to organize this in a way that would be digestible. So we put things in groupings for the moment. So the first one is brownfield grants and loans. This is going to go well beyond what you know in terms of maybe DTSC, state level, or EPA grants and loans. I think we have something like 33 on the matrix at the moment. This is free money, people. These are important. So that's going to be one category we're going to talk about. Public finance vehicles is another. And this is an area, in my opinion, that is very underutilized in the world of brownfields. So this is another passion topic of mine. I'm going to talk about integrating public financing vehicles with other brownfield funding to get difficult projects done, and I'll give you a few examples. And as a hint, in our second half, when you are sitting around this table, pay attention to the fact that I love public financing vehicles. Private investment. So I'm not, the matrix, it's beyond the scope of the matrix to list all the ways private investment comes in, debt and equity. More the point I want to make with the matrix and this discussion is kind of back to that topic I was talking a minute ago about when private investment comes in, how it integrates with some of the public financing vehicles and the grants. So I'll touch on that a little bit. I also have one kind of creative one that I put under the category of private investment that I'll talk about. And then lastly, end-use incentives. It's definitely out of the scope of the current matrix. I just mentioned it, and I only mentioned one. There's only one on the graph, and it's tax incentives associated with renewable energy. I mention it because if you really do look at the total capital stack of a brownfield project, some of those end uses, say solar, for example, do have an economic impact, a positive economic impact back to the developer, so it is considered in the overall stack. That comes typically later. By the way, that's another hint on one of the exercises. Comes later. Okay, before we jump into the matrix more, I want to talk a little bit about eligible entities, and I want to touch on public-private partnerships again. Actually, I'm going to call on Dana on eligible entities. Will you just, do you have a mic? Oh, right there, perfect. See if that works.
I can just.
Oh, that
there,
works,
okay.
that works.
I won't yell into that.
No, you're good. So Dana, again, national partner with SES on Brownfield grants. Dana cares deeply about eligible entities. It matters. She does a lot of grant writing on behalf of you in this room to be able to go after these grants, and she cares deeply about eligible entities. I'm going to let her just briefly kind of rattle through eligible entities, and then I'm going to put that concept on its ear for a minute, but you go first.
So eligible entities for EPA grants and also many of the ECRG grants, there's a number of different types of entities that are eligible, starting with states and tribes, local government entities, quasi-government entities, as well as nonprofits. So we work with a number of cities, states, tribes, and then, for example, nonprofit world, there's economic development councils that typically have a foundation or other nonprofit arm, and so they can be an eligible entity to receive EPA and ECRG grants as well.
Thank you, Dana. If you want to hear more about eligible entities, talk to Dana. But I want to put a little different twist on this, and that is my advice to you all is don't get too caught up in eligible entities. Don't give me a dirty look, and I understand how important it is for the individual applications. But where I'm going with that is there's always stakeholders and other players that you can align yourself with on a given project. Bring those stakeholders in, and some of them will be eligible entities that also have at least a component of your same mission. So I am a big fan of deal making and working with eligible entities, even if I wasn't an eligible entity. So yes, it matters, but what matters more is bringing in other stakeholders that might be eligible entities, matching them with projects, and getting the benefit of that eligible entity going after grant money. And we have a lot of examples about that. Jim Ritchie, raise your hand. Jim, I'm going to introduce more in a little bit, but one of the second example we're going to do today is based partially, loosely on West Sac. And boy, was that, the story there in West Sacramento really was about partnerships and bringing in other funding sources. So I'm going to let Jim introduce that in a little bit, so stand by. So that kind of goes to that public-private partnership side of things of, just it's deal making, it's in being inclusive and bringing in partners that have certain missions and can be eligible entities for for brownfield grants and combining that with private investment and public financing vehicles. It's deal making, and it's how so many of these difficult brownfield projects get done. So in the matrix that I held up a minute ago and have since lost, we tried to do an alphanumeric code for all the every funding source there. So grants is a G. They're numbered 1 through 33 or whatever the number is. So G1, G2, G3. Public finance vehicles, PF1, PF2, and so on. We did that. That has no meaning at all, other than just a way to organize the overall database and think about it. We also color-coded it, and you can't really tell, but the grants is blue. We have kind of that's actually green, believe it or not. Private investment is red, and then I think it's gray on the bottom. Oh, wow, that didn't show up like that at all. But that's how it looks like on the matrix. This will also be important on the exercise. Here's another hint. You're going to be building your own stack and sequence chart. I already warned you about that. I know you can't wait. In that, you're going to pay attention to those alphanumeric codes, because you're going to be given a certain number of building blocks and you're going to put them together. So you can refer back to the physical matrix itself and look at G8 to figure out what that is and how it might be used. So the alphanumeric code is going to help you through the process. And again, it's just a way for us to organize. So again, I want to be a reminder, we have big plans for this database. And we're going to need everybody in this room and plenty that aren't to help build it out. So I encourage you to contact us with funding sources. We did pretty good on federal and state for California so far. We did some other state, Arizona, DEQ has a great program, for example. It's a fund of funds, funder funding the fund from EPA. And so, but there's so much more work we can do there and add to that, and we want that to be a living, breathing document that everybody can then access. Again, particularly if you don't have deep expertise, you're going to need some help on how it all comes together, but that's at least a start for you. And certainly, if you come to me and you talk to me, tell me your story. I like to say at times, tell me your story, I'll tell you how to get it funded. We're going to do that by using the things off the database and the matrix. And then, by the way, on the exercise, we're going to flip the roles. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you the story of a scenario, and you're going to figure out how to get it funded. Okay. All righty. This is not meant to be comprehensive. It's just a reminder. Along the bottom, we have the life cycle of a brownfield project or a brownfield area. I threw out some kind of big categories of things that can be funded, but I would say this more generically, that for a brownfield project from the very, very beginning, even before you know it's a brownfield, all the way through vertical development, there is funding sources for everything along the way. They exist. The trick is finding them along the life cycle and integrating them in a way that's stack and sequence. So we'll talk a lot about that later, but I just wanted to throw some of those things up. The other thing I want to do real quick is define some terms. Horizontal and vertical development, if you're not, well, I kind of make this up, so I'll tell you what I mean by it. Horizontal development in my world is everything kind of ground down for development of a property. So that's things like after cleanup or even with cleanup at times, doing grading and doing infrastructure and utilities and all those kind of things. Really getting the dirt ready for vertical development. So infrastructure, utilities, all those kind of things. That's going to be important because a lot of our public funding vehicles, the PFs, are going to be for horizontal development, and they are also going to overlap with environmental cleanup and some of the other environmental aspects. Vertical development is just what it sounds like. It's going up from there. Our focus, because it's brownfields, is really mostly through horizontal development, because that's the nature of when brownfields are the challenge, right? Once it's vertical in general, we've solved a lot of the problems or managed that liability. So we will talk about vertical development. In fact, the second scenario that you're going to get today, here's another hint, has a lot of grants on the very back end. But I wanted to bring it up because it is a cool story about how you bring stakeholders in to get an overall project done. So that was a hint. Look for heavy grants on the back end of the second scenario. First scenario is more traditional. It's based on a lot of my personal experience. Both these are based on actual kind of stories or amalgam of multiple. The first one follows a pretty common scenario of grants up front, public vehicles in the middle, and then private investment toward the back. That's another hint for scenario 1. Okay, we talked about the overall matrix. Now you're going to sit here while I describe every one of the 55 funding sources we have on the sheet, so buckle up. No? Okay, I'm going to pick out a couple of my favorites then, one by one in each one of the categories. On the grant side, a lot of you already know the EPA grant side and the DTSC, state level side, but there's a lot of other things to look at. Do we have anybody from EPA here? Raise your hand if you're EPA. Oh, sorry, I was looking right at you, Lisa. Sorry. Tell us something about, can you grab a mic for her, Dana? Thank you. Tell us what's happening with the EPA grant world right at the moment. I know some things opened up. Say what you want to say in 30 seconds or a minute on EPA grants.
Yeah, right at the moment, we have our assessment, cleanup, and RLF grant funding proposal application requests that are due, requests for applications. They're due on the 14th of November.
I just have the
And
DTSC ones.
it's pretty exciting. As Meredith Williams mentioned in her talk, we are offering up to $4 million on cleanup grants, which is
I'll have her
unusual.
do it again when I get to
The
it.
other thing I would like to say
It'll be
is
easier.
we have 2 more years of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding coming to us, and we normally offer revolving loan fund grants and multi-purpose grants on alternate cycles. And that means this could be the last cycle with a bipartisan infrastructure law funding that offers revolving loan fund grant funding. And that also means that the 20% match requirement may come back. So, the cool thing about the bipartisan infrastructure law funding is we've been able to offer no matching for multi-purpose grants and cleanup grants and revolving loan fund grants, which is a big change. So it's a great opportunity if you are in fact able to apply for RLF grants.
You heard it here first. Thank you very much. I have a slide later, I think, so I might call on you again. And I also have a couple slides on DTSC update. So bear with me a minute. We'll come back to that. Okay. So on each one of these categories, I'm going to pick one. And typically, they're going to be my favorites for some reason, or maybe something that you haven't heard. This is one under the grant program I like. And one of the reasons I like this particular program is it applies to dry cleaner sites, among other things. And I was reading something I thought was really interesting, and emphasizes the need to use multiple funding sources to solve environmental problems in the state. Anybody want to guess the numbers that have been floated out there for the cost of cleanup in California for PCE coming from dry cleaners? Give me a number. What? Yeah. Well, let's have it start with a T. Okay, a T. Yeah, it goes, I've seen up to $1 trillion. I've seen 7.2 billion to something like 84 billion. It's a big number. This is not going to get solved by a state program. It's going to come from multiple funding sources. This particular program comes from the Water Board. The other point I wanted to make about this particular one, we talked about eligible entities. This one's different. It doesn't focus on eligible entities. It focuses on eligible projects, which is really kind of cool. That means, it's not just for nonprofits or municipalities or eligible entities. Anybody who has a project that qualifies. And it's things that are kind of common sense, ones that are direct harm to human health and the environment. It does prioritize environmental justice communities, but that's a pretty cool program under the grants. A lot to be said there. I mentioned we have over 30 on the chart so far on the matrix. Okay, public finance, my favorite. This is absolutely my favorite. I've said this many times over the years, that tax increment financing is the #1 underutilized funding source for brownfield redevelopment in the country. I'm passionate about that topic. Now, I backed off that in California, going back to about 2012, when California made that landmark decision to take away redevelopment agencies, and they gutted the increment a little bit. But I still love it. And if you don't know tax increment financing, I'm going to give you 30 seconds on it. Tax increment financing, you establish a district, a physical area. It could be a single site or it can be a broad area. It's typically blighted, right? That's why tax increment financing was invented, I think, in the 60s in California, actually, is to cure blighted areas. You figure out what property taxes are being paid in that district, that defined area. That's your starting point. Then you plan for redevelopment. You plan everything you're going to do over the next typically about 30 years, sometimes 25, sometimes up to 40. And so you plan everything that's going to be done and all the economic development associated with it within that district, right? Okay. Then you calculate the property taxes that will be paid over the course of that entire time, that 30 years. Additive, year after year after year. If it's a slow build out, it just adds up over time as you do the development and the property tax bill goes way up. Okay, at the end of that 30-year period, you've paid a lot. There's a lot of taxes that are planned. Again, this is all planned. Now you have two numbers. You have the total amount of tax that's going to be generated by the redevelopment, and you have the initial tax of the district, which typically in a blighted area is very low. The difference is the increment. A minus B is the increment. That increment can be used to pay for the very work that develops the property in the way you have it planned. It's similar to Mille Rouge. I like Mille Rouge. That's a great one. Look that one up. It's on the chart. Hang on to that thought. Let me finish what I'm going to say because that's a good reminder for a second. Okay, so now you have that increment. And here's the cool thing. At times it was used to reimburse developers that would go in and put infrastructure, even public infrastructure in that got turned over later. And they would have to wait till the increment got built and then get reimbursed by that fund. But something happened actually a couple decades ago where a lot of people started floating bonds, and that increment, that future planned increment is enough to be security to float bonds. A municipality can do it, you can go out to the private market, and then the bond buyer, very patient investors, right? They get paid back by the increment, but the money all comes in up front to pay for things. It's a really cool vehicle. It's one of my favorites, and we are lucky enough to have Jim Simon here. Jim, will you grab a microphone? Introduce yourself, and I know it's a little challenging in California with what happened with the redevelopment agencies, but this is a world you live in. Talk to us about EIFD a little bit.
Sure. Jim Simon, I'm with RSG, former redevelopment refugee, as a few of us are in the room here. We have several types of tax increment financing tools within California, the most common of which is an Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District, or EIFD. There's about 36 of those right now in the state of California. That law that went into effect back in 2016 has been incrementally growing up, just like the increment to do these districts. There are 2 communities in California that are in the process of issuing bonds that Eric was talking about. West Sacramento is going to be issuing bonds early next year, and another community in Southern California is working on that right now. So those areas are seeing that. There's a mention of CFDs here, Melrose districts, and EIFD or any of the other types of tools can also be used to backfill a CFD and essentially discount future CFD assessments. So there's a couple of different ways to make an EIFD work to leverage for that for private and public investment on brownfields.
Thank you, Jim. I might talk Jim into showing up at office hours if I can talk him into it, and you could ask him more about that, and we can talk about it there. Charles Robinson over here brought up the question about what I call special districts or utility districts. That's still also tax increment based, just a different version built around financing infrastructure. You're kind of doing the same thing. There's just different laws about how it happens. All states in the country have tax increment financing laws, so this is state law, local implement. Why is it locally implemented? For what I hope is a little bit obvious if I did a good job explaining it. The city within that has the tax increment financing district is not collecting those property taxes. They're foregoing those property taxes. The other tricky thing about it is A lot of that gets paid for by millage added to your tax bill. So if you live, for example, in a planned unit development, a resort community, any of those kind of things that have a lot of amenities, a lot of times TIF was used to pay for those things. Your tax bill is higher. Look at your tax bill sometimes and you'll see a lot of these. Utility districts work the same way. So that's my highlight for public financing. Okay, this is another favorite. And one that you may not have ever heard of. I put this under private investment. By the way, give me a little bit of leeway on how we lump these together. Some things that we might have thrown in public financing vehicles more look like grants, but don't get caught up in that. We just tried to organize it. Okay, general liability insurance proceeds, CGL. Does anybody have any idea what I'm talking about yet? Oh, good. That's my favorite. Okay, Jim does. CGL policies. Well, you have an insurance policy on your house, right? If a pipe breaks and it destroys your house, you make a claim against insurance for that broken pipe, right? Insurance then pays for the cleanup and the reworking of your house. CGL policies, essentially every business in the country has these and has had them for many, many decades. CGL policies at one point covered pollution events. So just like your house policy, you have a leaking underground storage tank, you have a leaking pipe, you have something associated with the operations of the business that resulted in contamination, you can make claims against that insurance policy to pay for the cleanup. Now, there's an important note about that. 1986 is an important date. Let's think about what was happening in 1986. We are, what is that, about 6 years into CERCLA, 6 years into Clean Water Act, I think 10 years into RCRA. By then, the insurance companies started to get a lot of claims because there was so much more enforcement than there was before that. As a result, in 1986, they issued collectively what is called all pollution exclusion, or APE, and it excluded those pollution events. So as cool as this is, it will only apply if the business was in place and had these policies before 1986. That's not as rare as you think. I've worked on a lot of these projects over the years, so if you have an old facility and an old business, particularly if it was in place behind 1986, send me a note, I'll screen it for you, I'll tell you if there's a possibility on this. I've had a couple cool examples. I owned, during my redeveloper years, I owned an industrial laundry in Washington State, which happens to be a very friendly state for the insured in this case. And we went after multiple insurers that had 3 or 4 different insurers plus umbrella policies. And at the end of the day, we settled for $11.7 million to pay for a $10 million cleanup. Once we did that, we had to provide a policy release, but with that, we could spend that money any way we wanted to. So we put $10 million toward the cleanup and the remainder toward other development costs. Now, I guess it's probably 2 years ago, I just got done with another deal on another site with AIG, settled for $3 million. So these things are not easy to do, and it takes some real specialty resources. If you have something that you think might be applicable, send me a note, I'll screen it for you. That's private investment. I mentioned this earlier, I'm not going to spend time on it now, just kind of have in the back of your mind end-use incentives. Okay, who do we have from ECRG here that wants to raise their hand? Don't make me read this. Anybody from ECRG? So Miriam provided us these slides. So I'll just kind of go through these. You can look at this. This morning was a summit on ECRG. It's made the news a lot lately, right, because of challenges in funding the ECRG program. So one point was just providing an update here. There's a lot of questions. There's probably more questions than answers when it comes to ECRG at the moment, but it has been a phenomenal program for a very long time, and everybody's hopeful that'll come back around. So that's the ECRG part. But the other point to be made is look at all the other stuff that DTSC does in terms of funding sources. So there's a bunch of others here. I'm not going to spend time going through those. Revolving loan fund's a pretty cool one, though. Right now, it's a little different product. It's not just a grant. It has different eligible people and different eligible projects, low interest loans. and on and on. So you can get an idea of what ECRG is doing. As EPA, see? Thank you, Claire. I should have paid more attention to the slides that she slid in there. EPA, Lisa, can we give you the mic again?
Sure.
You want to touch on anything else you didn't touch on before, or what's on this slide?
This is basically, in a nutshell, what I was talking about before. And the most important thing, as you can see in the column, the second to the right, the additional funding for the bipartisan infrastructure law. So that shows you all of the additional funding that we're getting over our regular appropriation, which we'll have this year, and then we'll have it into 2026. And then after that, we don't know what happens. And as I mentioned before, the RLF grants, which are for cleanup, and the cleanup grants, they do not have a 20% matching requirement when they're funded using the bipartisan infrastructure law. So that's a huge benefit. So this is just an estimate of the number of awards that we're going to have this year, and then it also shows the total funding amounts available for the different types of grants. And as I mentioned previously, we probably will alternate next year and offer multi-purpose grants, which are assessment and cleanup, and not offer revolving loan fund grants.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you very much. I was fortuitous in thinking about multi-purpose grant for exercise 2. That's a hint. Thank you for that. Okay, another tangent, but a really important one, is that in addition to grants and other funding sources, there's also grants that are being used for technical assistance programs. I'm going to turn the mic over to Claire Weston of CClear for a moment, and she's going to talk to us about a couple slides related to technical assistance programs.
Thanks, Eric. That was way too loud, sorry about that. I just wanted to impart to you guys the importance of leveraging technical assistance programs in addition to any other funding sources that you use. It's really the best way to be efficient and strategic in your capital stack planning. So you're not meant to be able to read this, I know you can't, but this is really just to show you the volume of technical assistance programs that exist to support land reuse and environmental justice throughout Region 9. So you can't read it, I get it, but I just want to highlight a couple, if you wouldn't mind clicking. So just wanted to highlight these, and I'm highlighting these because they're representatives from these entities here at California Land Recycling Conference that you should talk to if you're interested. So Center for Creative Land Recycling, we're the technical assistance to brownfields provider for EPA Regions 9 and 10. We support brownfield communities throughout the land reuse process. Center for Community Energy and Environmental Justice is here. They are a new TA program. They are called the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Program, or Center, TICTAC for short. And they are helping EJ communities find funding and build capacity for community revitalization. Talk to Paige. They have an exhibitor booth. Land Revitalization Technical Assistance, this is an EPA-run technical assistance program. They help communities determine which types of brownfield sites reuses are feasible given local conditions, infrastructure availability, community site design preferences, and funding resources. Talk to EPA about this opportunity. And also run by EPA are targeted brownfields assessments, helping communities understand potential contamination at brownfield sites to best plan for cleanup and redevelopment. So if a MARC grant, what Lisa was speaking about, maybe feels like too big of a lift for you right now, a targeted brownfield assessment might be the way to go. So I'm highlighting these in particular because we are here to help you and talk you through them if you're interested in learning more.
And so many people are, right? So what do we need for these projects? We need money and we need expertise. So the whole workshop is about the money side of it, but this is about also being able to access expertise. So I think that's pretty cool. Okay, we're going to move on, and we're going to spend a few minutes setting ourselves up for the second hour. Question in the back of the room.
Not a question, but I wanted to add to what Claire said. We are the new technical assistance provider for the revolving loan fund. So if you have a revolving loan fund, you're applying for a revolving loan fund, we are here. I have to throw
Thank you. That was Diana Sasser, by the way. Thank you for speaking up. Okay, we're going to set ourselves up for the second half of the workshop by talking about a few of the concepts associated with stack and sequence and really set ourselves up for the exercise. Stay tuned for the second half because that's where we're really going to start having fun and you don't have to listen to me ramble as much. If it isn't obvious yet, stacking is using multiple sources of funding at the same time and oftentimes for the same work. And that's important if it's not obvious. You can use multiple sources of funding to accomplish the same tasks that you need to accomplish on a brownfield project. And then the sequencing is working those across the life cycle of a brownfield project or a brownfield area. So what happens, and you'll see this in a minute, is you have stacks and then you have sequences. So you'll have a stack and then you'll move over to the next phase of brownfield. You'll have another stack, and they build on each other over time. The stack and sequence matters, and there's some obvious things on here, but I really want to emphasize it. It takes a lot of planning. You have to be thinking ahead, and this is the business of brownfields. This is taking pretty pictures and ideas that the community and stakeholders and municipalities want for their brownfield areas or their brownfield projects, and it's adding this important layer of how is it going to get funded through the entire life cycle of the brownfield project. So sequencing matters. It takes a lot of planning and forethought to do it. And even more than that, certain funding sources, and take tax increment financing, for example, that might not come into play until horizontal development, can use the work that is being done by grants to prepare for the tax increment financing. That's not an instantaneous thing. You don't raise your hand and say, give me a TIF, I'm going to form a TIF district. You have to determine levels of blight and other things, and in need, there's a but-for test that says this project would not get done but for the help of tax increment financing. The things that you need to prove and set yourself up for a TIF can be done in previous stages of funding, but you have to be thinking, that far ahead. I mentioned the last bullet, the holistic part. This is, again, one of my passion topics. It may look out of place here, but it's really not. Successful brownfield redevelopment projects look at everything at the same time: real estate, environmental, and funding. And you have to look at it this way. And the stack and sequence concept helps refine us and helps get us to think about things holistically, not in individual silos. Okay, I'm going to orient you to this chart. In a minute, I'm going to ask the facilitators to go grab some easels and some poster boards, and we're going to set them up around the room, and they're going to look just like this. And so to orient you here, this is funding on the left, right? And it starts with 0 and goes up to whatever number, but it increases as you go up. And then on the bottom, again, is kind of my really simplified take on the life cycle of a brownfield project or a brownfield area. It starts from, a lot of times, due diligence on a project or a municipality identifying an area of blight that might have brownfields in it. Starts on the left, and you kind of work your way through the process, right? There's environmental assessment. You figure out what's there, how big the problem is. There's environmental cleanup. We roll that into horizontal development, and we roll that into vertical development. All along the way, particularly in the early stages, hopefully you're doing land use planning. Again, you have to be if you're using certain tools. If I borrow on TIF again, TIF only exists because you create a development plan for an area or a site, and you're calculating the property taxes based on a specific development plan. So that's happening early on. And again, like I talked about earlier, there's funding sources for every phase, and that's what stack and sequence is all about: finding the funding sources for each stage, stacking them when you can, and sequencing them when you have to. So a lot of people are used to looking at a capital stack. You're going to pretend for the moment that each one of these has an alphanumeric code and is an individual funding source straight off the matrix, okay? I left it generic for the moment, but the actual matrix and the exercise we're going to go through, these are all going to be labeled with individual funding sources. These are the building blocks of stack and sequence. I mentioned that earlier. But instead of just having them stacked, which is a lot of people are aware of, we're gonna stack and we're gonna sequence. So your chart, our chart, a chart for brownfield stack and sequence is going to look like this. And there's a couple things I want you to note. Some of these things are stacked, right? Others are sequenced. It always is a stair step because you're always adding to the capital stack. So it has to, by definition, the way I'm doing this, be a stair step up, but it takes the overall amount and divides it into the individual phases for development. So when you're doing a stack and sequence chart, you're finding the individual boxes that can pay for environmental cleanup, horizontal development. You're figuring out how they integrate together, how they can be stacked with other sources, and how they can be sequenced. So that's what that chart is going to look like. Okay, we're going to take a minute and set up our chart, and I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. And I'm going to do that by borrowing Ashley for a minute. Okay. This is our speaker. Let me borrow those for a second. I'm going to steal Ashley's. I'll come back. I was told if I get near any one of the speakers, I'm going to physically blow up. So I'm going to. That's why I've been trying to stay in the center of the room because that doesn't sound great. This is our chart. It looks just like that. It's foam core. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you a scenario. It's going to be this scenario. I'm going to read it to you in a minute or talk to you about it in a minute. This is our funding scenario. Remember, I love the phrase, tell me your story, I'll tell you how to get it funded. That's what I do for a living. I love that part of it. In this case, I'm going to tell you a story, and you're going to tell me how to stack and sequence it, and you have facilitators that are going to help. So if you are anywhere near a chart and an easel, then kind of gather and join one group or another. And what's going to happen is your facilitator, this is exercise 1. We're going to do this twice, by the way. This is exercise 2. Your facilitator are going to take this and they're going to dump it out on the table. And it's going to include push pins, that's important, but it's also going to include individual funding blocks. And they're going to be labeled. This one says PI1, private investment developer equity. Here's one, G1, ECRG community-wide assessment, and so on. And you're going to be given the building blocks that make up this scenario. They're going to be used to fund this scenario. So you don't have to look at 60 things on the chart. You only have to look at 10 spread out on the table. And you are going to work together in the table, and you're going to come up, using your facilitator for help, you're going to come up with your own stack and sequence chart, and it's going to look like that previous page. It's going to be stair-stepped. And you're going to figure out where to start and what to use for each one of the phases. Okay. Look, this does not have to be perfect. At the end of it, I'm going to tell you what I came up with. Do not try to make this perfect. You're only going to get about 10 or 12 minutes to be able to do this. Just have the dialogue. We think it's really important just to talk and to talk about what your individual experiences and knowledge base is. And maybe if you didn't sleep through the first half of this, then you'll come up with some ideas on how to stack and sequence. So we're going to do that times 1. And then at the end of that, we're going to talk a little bit about it, and your facilitator is going to be a speaker for the group unless they talk into somebody else doing it, and we're going to talk a little bit about what you guys came up with. So take a minute and gather around your facilitator in one way, pull up a chair, turn the direction of a facilitator of a chart. If you are a facilitator, take envelope 1 and dump it out on a nearby table. You guys can hang out, you can join. Oh, Chad's got you covered. All right.
I'm sorry.
Okay, perfect. That's where I wanted to be. Who here thought they were going to just sit by today in the back of the room and not participate? Everybody's in. Okay. Can I get everybody's attention for 1 minute before you dive in? Hopefully you're finding your facilitator. You're in charge. And then, okay, let's talk about this stack and sequence example. This particular one is a municipality-led scenario. That's important in this piece. The second one is going to be an affordable housing developer-led, but the first one is this. And in this scenario, the community has an area that they think is blighted and has contaminated brownfield sites. A lot of those properties are abandoned. There's one particular property that anchors the area, which is a manufacturing business that has been in operation for decades. Does anybody remember what I talked about in terms of operating for decades? This is a hint of your stack and sequence. Our town, the community and local stakeholders really want to see the site cleaned up and redeveloped. Not a big surprise, right? The manufacturing facility wants to exit. They want to go home. But they're worried about environmental liability. What happens if they try to release a property that has already contaminated? So they're going to care a lot about that. There's been heavy developer interest in this particular area. They're scared about environmental liability. So how are they going to look at it? And here's your hint, when are they going to come in? When is the developer going to come in, one of the stakeholders? So that being said, you are on the countdown of 10 minutes to work with your facilitator, and they are going to pin the individual stack and sequence. So go to work. Start pinning things up as you go. Figure out how you want to start and put the first initial pins in the board.
Here, under transactions, or later?
Start on the left. Everybody start on the left. Guys, I want to give you a hint. Here comes a hint. For grants, there's almost always a public investment that goes along with it. There's a match, there's bringing additional capital, there's resources. For all the grants, there's almost always a public investment that goes with it. Jen, work your way up. They have to be a stair step.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so then if you would have that one, then you would go up. Oh, shoot. I have something I forgot about. Guys, this might help. Look through a couple of those if you want to look something up. Guys, here's a couple you can look, subcillium matrix. Guys, here's a few of the matrices if you want to look any of these up. Here's a copy of the matrix if you want to look any of these up. Got, did I give you these? Copies of the matrix if you want to look some of them up. Guys, yeah, of course.
Right on top.
Copies of the matrix if you want to look up some of these and get some ideas.
You only have 10 minutes.
Well, if you want to look at what the Circle 108 funds are, look it up. Guys, here's copies of the matrix if you want to look through some of these that might help you.
Oh, yeah. We kept talking about matrix.
That's the matrix.
Now you do.
Do we have to, before you do anything, have a card by chance in case I don't catch you?
Yes, I'll grab one for you in a moment. Oh. Guys, here's a copy of the matrix, if that helps you. Look up a few of those. Sorry, should have given that a little earlier.
Yeah, no, there is.
Excuse me.
I mean, they might help with horizontal, but
Oh, you guys are doing good.
yeah.
How are we doing over here? Oh,
Which is, actually, I know he said it's common use somewhere.
it's always going to be stair step, though. You want more? So I didn't do one for. What's that? Oh, good, good. I'm glad it's helpful.
Okay.
More of these. How we doing, everybody? Excuse me.
You can always stack those. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Use that funding for the one you just put up. I mean, it's better for the development. We're thinking about
I lost my clicker. So far, so good. I lost my clicker. I literally lost the slide clicker. Wait. Nope.
Well, it could be investment things like time.
You guys doing all right? Oh, dang it. Okay. Goodness. How's everybody doing? You better be wrapping up here in a minute. You guys are doing good. I like. Yeah, you're doing good. Oh, I like. You guys are doing good. Good job. You guys are doing good. Good job. Oh, you guys are doing really good.
Shopping center on top of the land.
I like it. Okay, you guys are doing good. Oh, I like that. That's good. That's very good.
I don't have ECRG
Are you cheating?
in Nevada.
Oh, I know. That's okay. You're doing good. ECRG looks a little bit like a EPA. Same use. All right, I heard somebody, that group's done. Wrap it up there, Chad. Good work. Wrap it up, everybody. Good work. Wrap it up. Take your seats. Wrap it up. Take your seats. Wrap it up. Take your seats, please.
Assessment to clean.
Yeah, I have a few more. I'll grab a couple. Everybody wrap it up. Take your seats.
Yeah, but most of our projects.
All right, wrap it up, you guys. Sit down. Okay, let's talk about how we did. Everybody take a seat. Let me get your attention back again. Okay, let's decide who to pick on.
I think Ignacio.
Ignacio, I heard his entire group celebrate over here. Did everybody hear that? They kind of clap. Ignacio, tell me how you started. What'd you start with?
Well, our group basically figured out that this is the city they have to invest, and but maybe they start with a grant first before they spend their money. So that's where we started with an ECRG community-wide. I think most people probably started off that way. Good for you. And then once the ECRG cleared up, and then you focused in on one site, you did a site-specific investigation. And from there, you figure out whether you want to buy it, and you could actually clean it up at the same time under ECRG. You can't do that under EPA. EPA have to buy it first before you can use a cleanup grant. But for ECRG, you can kind of, depending on the eligibility, you can actually go for the ECRG. And everything falls from there. Then private investment, city continues to contribute over the term of it. Infrastructure comes in. When you talk about infrastructure, you do EIFDs. And then the private investors basically see the city is dedicated to this, they are involved and they're committed. And that's when they start coming in. And then you can start applying for tax credits for the end users.
Thank you, perfect. I'm going to reveal in a minute what I came up with. Again, no right or wrong answer. Dana, do you have a microphone? Yep. Tell us how, I just want to know how you handled cleanup. So what did you guys do for cleanup only?
So for cleanup, we did the comprehensive general liability insurance policies as well as an ECRG remediation grant. And then we just kind of along the whole process, we do have the local government investment trailing along with that.
I love it.
It may not exactly cover cleanup, but we figured it would just kind of follow us along the whole path.
Did you catch the last part of that? She caught on to that, public, local government investment alongside everything else that's happening. It just has to happen in one way or another. So I think that's right. I like the CGL policies. This group over here, let's take a little peek. What did you think the CGL policies were going to pay for in this group?
I think we had it. Assessment and cleanup.
Assessment and cleanup. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's going to be more on cleanup, by the way, just so you know. Ashley, how did you guys do horizontal development in your example?
We moved into,
Horizontal development.
we were looking at the tax increment financing as we got to horizontal development and also the private investment developer equity.
I love it. Okay, so horizontal development, TIF's great for that. Special district's great for that. Here's the cool thing about those kind of tools. They can be used for the brownfield aspects of a project, for environmental cleanup. You can do a lot of broad things with some of these public financing vehicles. Let's see what I came up with, and you can kind of see how it matches up. I thought it made sense to start, kind of big picture and work our way down. We heard Ignacio say that. I think he got that exactly right. I made a comment earlier, local investments essentially going to come alongside any of these grants. There's got to be a match. There's got to be, or just the desire to be able to fund along with it. Okay, did anybody get this in this location? It wouldn't have to be. This is one, that's because you cheated, Jim, and I know you did. 128A grants, they're small amounts of money, but it's almost more technical assistant program in my mind. They can help with planning. They can help with figuring out a design charrette, that kind of stuff. So it could have been multiple places along here. Don't get caught up in that. I put it early on, but small but important 128A. It made sense to me to go from broad to more narrow and zero in on an investigation, public investment to go along with it. ECRG grant for mediation, I hope that one was rather obvious. But to go along with it, the CGL insurance proceeds. I was talking to this table briefly. They made a comment about putting CGL for both assessment and cleanup. I will say, although that's generally true, it's going to be much more on the cleanup side because you're going to have to prove to the insurers that you have a claim, and you're going to have it assessed to be able to make that claim. So just be aware of that. We talked about, again, tax increment financing for horizontal. I have it over horizontal, but that could have been stretched over to the left, right? So it could, left, correct. So it could have been used for cleanup as well as infrastructure. Private investment, so again, think about when this came in. A lot's happened between there and private investment. Doesn't have to be that way, but boy, is that a way to attract that private investment, and then it becomes a big box, right? That's a big box. That's a big piece of capital in this example. And then, because I couldn't ignore it, the end-use incentives on it. So I think you guys did great. I really appreciate it. We are going to do this again. I'm going to ask facilitators to pull down the pins. Take a minute, pull down the pins, put away the exercise 1 building blocks, put them away, hide them, put them in the envelope if you would. Pull the pins out, you're going to need them. You're going to reuse the pins, you're going to put away the exercise 1. And in a minute, we're going to work to a second story. Tell me a story, I'll tell you how to get it funded. I'm going to tell you the story, you're going to tell me how we get it funded. When you're done cleaning up the mess, take envelope 2, dump it out onto the table. In fact, if you want to do that now while the cleanup's being done, just don't confuse the 2 envelopes. You can start looking through, thinking about what's going to happen when I show this scenario for you. All right, good. Okay, can I get everybody's attention back to the screen? Here's a second scenario. Both these scenarios I talked about being based in reality, right? The first one was kind of based on my own experience on a number of different projects. This one is based mostly on West Sacramento because I will tell you it is a cool story. Jim Ritchie, raise your hand. Somebody give that man a mic. Jim does a lot. We do a lot of brownfield stuff together. He's a project director within the company, a vice president, leads our Northern California, but does a lot of other things. And Jim, you guys have a session coming up on West Sac. Tell us about it.
Yeah, shameless plug. Thursday morning, Aaron Laurel, city manager for West Sacramento. He'll be talking. I don't know why I'm there, but just maybe to introduce him. But they,
eye candy.
City of West Sac has done a phenomenal job of planning, redeveloping, acquiring different kinds of funds. They're issuing bonds, as Eric mentioned, next year. But Aaron is really one of the brainchildren behind the whole process. So his talk, I think, will be pretty impressive.
That'll be awesome. Thank you, Jim. And what's cool about that one is this is really stack and sequence in action. You know, I tried to make these pretty reality-based, but they're still kind of made-up scenarios. I had to do a little bit of simplifying for our purposes of the exercise and not make your heads explode. But West Sac is the real deal, and the second scenario is partially based on West Sac. I want you to take a minute and read this scenario. Again, we're back in our town, USA. Imagine that. They have a blighted area they want to see redeveloped. That's the common start, right? And the city really started this overall scenario, thinking about the project. But along the way, a affordable housing developer recognized a particular site that they wanted to redevelop. But they were worried about what? Environmental liability, how to pay for things. A partnership was formed between the city and the developer. And this is an important one, and it's such a cool part of the project. The group went out to local and state stakeholders that had an interest, had a mission associated with what they wanted to accomplish, and they found a lot of funding sources for this particular project, and it's a cool part of the story. It's stack and sequence at its best. The city has a progressive brownfield program. That's important. That's not always the case, but in this case, it's important. And they were able to, as I mentioned earlier, engage with multiple agencies to be able to get the project done. Alongside private investment. So with that being said, you have approximately 10 minutes. Given that scenario, I've told you the story. You tell me how it's going to get funded. Build your stack and sequence starting now. No cheating over here. I know these guys know some of the answers, so no cheating. Remember the hints I gave you earlier. Here's a hint. Here comes a hint. A lot of the grants came later in the program on this one. They came for the vertical development. Oh, see? I fooled you because a lot of times it happens up front. This one, the grants came later. You look up, use your matrix, look them up on the matrix. Look them up on the matrix.
I'm assuming no place like home funds the vertical development.
Look it up on the matrix. But,
Yeah, you can use the matrix as a...
That's why you gave us these.
but you're also correct.
At least that's the developer I'm working with.
The public finance, those came later in this case. The green came later in a lot of cases. Green comes later.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was like.
And I think just the fact that
In this case, don't get too caught up in the difference between green and blue, grants and public finance. They look pretty similar in this case. Most of the green come later. Most of the green come later. There you go. I heard that one, Mike. What do you think it takes to get a bank involved? Guys, here's a hint. What does it take to get a bank involved in a project? Do they want to buy something that has environmental liability? They want to buy that liability? They don't. They want that liability solved for. Do they want an investment from a private entity for that entity to be able to get a bank loan? Yes, they do. That's how you get banks involved. Reduce the environmental liability, co-invest.
Because all the rest of these seem like they have to do with horizontal and vertical development.
yeah,
Probably.
Yeah. According to your chart, but this
Yeah.
one confuses me. I'm very.
Yeah, that's kind of, that's
No,
just,
it's
that,
just this part confuses. I understand
fee
the rest
waiver.
of it, the fee waiver part.
yeah. So I wouldn't expect you to know it, and I think I have it on the chart, but,
It is on the
But-
chart, but it doesn't say fee waiver.
It just says local government investment.
oh, I just put it in that generic category. So in this case, I will tell you, the local government waived a lot of the development fees that are typically required for applications. It's a small amount, but it was worth mentioning because it showed the commitment from the local government, and they can add up.
So for applications, is that something you want to put
So
at the
th-
very beginning then?
You think about where in the process. It's not overly, that part's not overly critical. Just know that that was a part of what made this project work. Yeah. And you guys heard about the private bank, what it takes to get a bank involved?
no, we heard you mention.
Okay, guys,
It wouldn't come into play. It's all done. And you
guys, a bank, what does it take to get a bank involved in a brownfield project? Two things. They want it, well, yes, okay, so hang on to that thought, because you're right. Number one, they want reduction of environmental liability before they get involved. Number two, they want co-investment from the private party who's the developer, which is their either in the form of security or capital. So you want to match that up with what?
Credits, maybe? Developer equity, yeah.
You'll never get this one. I wouldn't expect you to. I will tell you, I'll kind of give you the answer. That was an add-on from the bank, actually.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah, yeah. They gave them additional equity through tax credits. Okay, did you remember what's important about bank? What does a bank want to finance? So they want, banks won't get involved till you've reduced that environmental liability and that you co-invested. So developer investment and bank loan go together. And I would never expect you to get tax credit equity, so I'll give you the hint, it was an add-on from the bank. It was tricky. Okay, you guys heard the part about, oh, you're doing good. You heard the part about what it takes to get a bank loan in all this, right? Okay, so I think you're doing well. You would never get the tax credit equity, so I'm just gonna tell you it was an add-on from the bank. I would never expect you to understand that, but they were given credit for additional equity, yeah. Oh, I like that. You guys did good. I wouldn't expect you to understand the tax credit equity. That was a little bit of a trick. The bank, and this is all true story, and the bank in this case gave, as part of the loan, they gave the developer credit for additional equity in the form of tax credit. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I wouldn't expect you to know that. I had never heard of it before in my life, but it happened with the bank at West
We don't
Sac.
have any historic preservation tax credits, Eric. Why don't we have any
Oh, dang
historic
it.
preservation tax credits?
See, that's, so you have to send me a note, say, Eric, you dummy, you left that off the matrix.
My Virginia client that loves this stuff said the most profitable project he's had was when they had to redo an old mill and put housing in an old mill.
Oh, that's good to know. That's good to know. Okay, I like this. I like this. It's looking good. So you guys were kind of smartly put equity above, before bank loan. A lot of times they'll just go together, so you could stack them. The bank will fund, but they want to know that you're putting equity in alongside. It can happen at the same time. I wouldn't expect you to get the tax credit equity. That was a loop I just threw you. It was an add-on to the program with the bank, so I wouldn't expect you to get it, but I think you're doing good. How's everybody doing?
Did we get it in the right place?
You are. It went right with the bank loan, so essentially yes. Yeah, you did
So
good.
did one come before the other? Does this come before this one?
It came on top of it technically because it was really, here's the loan, but when they were figuring out equity, they gave them credit through tax credits.
So one thing that Kevin Habitat talked about is the difference between private ownership and rentals.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
There's a different interest in financing.
You're right about that. Yeah. How'd we do? Let's see.
What our last one? We're looking at develop equity, whether it should be over here or more in the
So it could have been either right. And actually, I'll tell you, if the piece of paper could have been longer, I would have stretched it across both horizontal and vertical in this case. So I just didn't. What is important, you have it ahead of the bank loan, but what will typically happen is they come exact same time. So a bank will give a loan if the developer is putting in cash along with it. So, I mean, but it's at least, but it's first or together. It's not the other way around at all. And then tax credit equity you would never get. That was a trick question. It was an add-on that I'd never seen before, but the bank gave the developer additional credit for their equity in the form of tax credit. So that was kind of a cool thing. All right, how we doing? Let's start wrapping it up.
So it just tastes like a process,
Let's wrap it up, everybody. Take your seats. Everybody grab a seat. Okay, who am I going to pick on? Cheryl, who should I pick on? Who should I pick on? What table should I pick on? Okay, you'll do it. I appreciate it. So, Cheryl, just tell us how you started. At the very beginning of the project, what'd you put first?
We put the
Use your mic.
community assessment grant.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Community-wide assessment grant, then from there to the multi-purpose for environmental cleanup.
Yeah.
And then we started working with the
Yeah.
community government, started the investment, and then we got the private investor involved, and then got involved with the bank loan and the tax credit equity, and of course, funding from California, which I know nothing about, no. From the, I can't read it, Affordable Housing Program funds, and also from HCD.
Perfect. How many groups put the multi-purpose grant across assessment and cleanup? Raise your hand if you did that. Everybody did that for the most part? Yes. So that's a cool one. We heard from EPA earlier today in the open plenary and a little bit earlier in this about the multi-purpose grant program coming up that's going to replace the revolving loan fund. That's a cool one because it's big dollars and it stretches across multiple tasks. So that's pretty cool. Let's see. How many people put developer equity ahead of or with the bank loan? Ahead of or with the bank loan? Raise your hand if you put developer equity ahead of or with the bank loan. That would be a correct answer. This is pretty common sense. I mentioned this earlier. Banks want to see reduction in environmental liability, and they want to see co-investment from the developer. I know a lot of you stacked it or I guess did it sequentially. You put the developer equity and then bank loan. Certainly that can do it. They'll get credit for that at the time they do their loan application. But a lot of times it just comes in together. They need to borrow $5 million. Developer puts in 1, bank puts in 4. Happens at the exact same time. Okay, I had a curveball in here. Tax credit equity. I had no idea what that was. West Sacramento did it. I thought it was pretty cool. It was part of the bank loan, actually. So you would have it stacked with the bank loan. There's no way you would know that. I just thought it was really cool because the bank it's all loan to value in these bank loans, and understanding the equity that this developer is putting in. And they gave them credit for equity that they were getting as tax credits. So it was just kind of a cool thing the bank did. I wouldn't expect you to do it. Figure that out. I had no idea myself. Okay, let's see how I did. Okay, I think everybody got this right. We started broad again, and I mentioned in this scenario, and this is a common scenario where municipalities have an area they want to see the blight cleaned up and redeveloped, so that was pretty straightforward. We talked about stretching that. That's a big number, by the way. That's a big fat box, right, on purpose. So we talked about being able to use that, and that's important on a lot of these funding sources. They don't have to be isolated to one of the tasks along the timeline. I did it a fair bit on these scenarios just for simplicity, but a lot of the funding sources will stretch across multiple activities associated with the timeline of a brownfield site, and multipurpose is one of those. CDBGs, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. This is, again, is kind of a tax-based incentive that municipalities use. CDBGs have been around for a very, very long time. They are a helpful resource and they come from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, from a federal level, and they're most commonly used for infrastructure and those kind of things. So CDBGs is a great tool. HCD, the state of California Housing and Community Development has a lot of programs. If you look at the grant part of the sheet and public finance, some of those I told you not to get too caught up in the colors and the coding, but HCD has a lot of programs that can be really valuable, and there's some cool stuff that they're doing, and West Sac took advantage of that and did a lot. So in this case, the infrastructure grant helped. This was as opposed to maybe tax increment financing or one of the other tools we talked about. So CDBGs and, in this case, an infrastructure grant. Fee waivers, I wouldn't really expect you to fully get. I threw them in here. They could be anywhere along the way. What this was for West Sacramento was they just waived all the development fees through the course of the process for this. So, it's not big money, but it does add up. It does matter, and it shows the commitment of a local government entity in helping this developer along. They didn't have to do a ton. They didn't give them cash. They just waived some of these fees. I put it over horizontal and vertical development where the fees are typically a lot higher, but it could have been anywhere along the way. Don't worry too much about that. And then again, I mentioned HCD. How cool. They have a fund called No Place Like Home. This is specifically for homeless population. I talked about this being an affordable housing developer. That came in. And then there was other affordable housing funds, and if I can remind myself, I'm going to tell you about this one because it's pretty cool. Federal Home Loan Bank Act, there's a whole bunch of acronyms associated with this one, but it's pretty cool because it's specifically for affordable housing projects in low-income areas. We've talked about this a lot, right? Developer equity coming in at some point. Developer equity could stretch across a lot of this. It could go way back to the beginning. In this case, I made the assumption that there was kind of a running start before the developer put in a lot of equity. But it certainly comes in with or at the same time either at the same time or before a bank loan. I mentioned this earlier, banks want reduction in environmental liability, they want co-investment, that's why it's shown here. You could have shown private investment developer equity early on and then followed that on with the bank loan. They'd still get that credit, but most of the time, the way I see it, they come together at the same time. Tax credit equity, I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't expect you to know, that was kind of a funny one where the bank gave them credit for the developer equity credit based on the tax credits they got. Okay, how'd we do? We're starting to wrap up. All right, a couple of things to talk about. We're going to take some questions and talk through this a little more. First of all, we mentioned earlier office hours today, 4 to 5. Tomorrow, 4:15 to 5:15. Office hours are your opportunity to come and talk to us and tell me your story, and we'll see if we can't help get the project funded. So please come to that. And if we don't have the chance to talk, find me. Dana and I are here for the next couple days. Are you here through tomorrow? I'm here through Thursday. Find me. And if that doesn't work, then email me. And we'll set up a separate session and talk. Tell me your story. I'll tell you how to get it funded. What questions do we have? Did we learn anything today? Was this better than 2 hours of people rambling up on the stage, sitting up there? Is that helpful?
Yeah, good.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Come on, questions, anybody?
Eric, we have one in the app.
Ooh, talk to me.
Ignacio
1 second.
mentioned that lots of people are looking forward to land acquisition grants, and we could answer it, but I have a feeling that he has, okay. Okay. Well, the main one that comes to mind for me is the new EPA community change grants have funding for land acquisition.
That's awesome.
I believe some of the HCD programs have funding for land acquisition too.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat the
EPA community change grants. Ignacio, do you want to add anything?
Yes. I like that idea. And it reminds me, maybe with the matrix, we ought to list land acquisition as one of the kind of overall activities. It didn't occur to me to do that, so I like that idea a lot. That's a good idea. Yeah, what did I say? All right, as we do acronyms, so HCD, as a reminder, is California Housing Community Development. So, and I'll try to remember acronyms. Julia has a question over here, Claire.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that in addition to the community change grants, which are actually due in November, so there's like really not that much time left, and it's a really, really big lift. The Thriving Community Subawards, which will launch in the next few months, also includes a little bit of money for purchase and acquisition. It's not a lot, but we're looking at anywhere between $125,000 to because it can be 50% of your total award, and the awards are between $250,000 and $350,000. So keep an eye out for those. They should be released. Information on that should be released in the next couple of months, and we have a session on it tomorrow. Rise and Thrive. We'll talk more about those grants.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Will you hand the microphone to Jim? Jim wanted to make a point, and I promise I haven't forgotten about it.
I just wanted to tack on to that. A lot of the housing program funds that are out there they tend to not favor what's known as pre-development costs. So these grants that we're talking about here for acquisition or pre-development costs are especially important if you're trying to do an affordable housing project.
Perfect. Will you hand that over to Julia? Question?
Well, the EPA grants they're highly competitive, and there's not that many of them. So do you have thoughts about what one does if you don't get them?
I'm going to start, get help. I mean, this is really what C-Clear does, and SCS does it, Dana does it, but there's plenty of other resources out in that hallway that help with it. Get help. Writing these, you have to tell a story. So I keep using that as a theme. Learn to tell your story in a compelling way. Now, I'll give you the real answer because she's a lot smarter than I am.
Oh, I was just grabbing the microphone.
Oh, dang it. Anything to add on that?
No.
You know, just, yeah, so get help.
There's, we had that technical assistance slide, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Any of the resources on that slide can, yeah.
I love the storytelling. You have to be able to tell a compelling story. And there's groups in this room and people in this room like Jim Ritchie, for example, that can help tell the story and show you examples of other communities that told a story in a way that was compelling to EPA. And it matters how you tell that story. So it doesn't matter what the story is if you don't tell it well. Will you hand that over?
What I was going to say is C-Clear has examples on their website, and they can direct you to the examples of other EPA grants that were awarded.
Perfect. Yeah, C-Clear, this is what, they do a lot of things really well, but one of those is help grant support. So start there, start with Dana, start with myself, start with Jim. There's other people that can help you. Jim, comment?
Yeah, it's part of telling the story also are what are called story maps that EPA encourages now that will pay for that as part of their grants. It lives on, and it can be an iterative or a living, breathing document, but it talks about past, present, future, and it engages the community. It's typically they're very graphic heavy, so it's appealing to the eye. So it's just another part of telling the story that can come into play, that can help for years to
Jim, if they sent you a note that said, send me your story map, could you send that to them?
Oh, it's on our slides, but
Okay.
we can. But it is on the City of West Sacramento's website, and we'll be showing it on Thursday as well.
Other questions? Topics? Ignacio?
Demolition.
What?
How do you fund demolition?
That's a good question. Some of the public financing sources for sure. Dana, what won't pay for demolition? Let's start there. A lot of the grants won't touch demolition, right?
In most cases.
In most cases. So that's a tough one. So I heard land acquisition and demolition. So thank you, Ignacio, for throwing both those curveballs my direction this late in the game. The public finance vehicles can for sure. I don't know that I have a lot more help. I'll work on that one. But, tax increment financing, the municipal districts, they definitely pay for demolition and cleanup. But that's a fair question. Yes, Ignacio. Okay.
But they don't have a clear path. We've been asking them, they're aware that people need demo. So that's something for other folks. I mean, people who need it should follow up with HCB so that they feel the heat of the need for demolition.
That's good to know.
And also, the demo can also fit within site prep.
Okay.
So if they make it look like site prep,
Yeah.
might be able to fund demolition, but it complicates
Yeah.
assessment and abatement.
Doing double duty applies to others as well, right? So cleanup and site prep can definitely go together. You're moving soil, you're doing this or that. Even vertical development or the horizontal part of vertical development where you're doing a VIM system, a vapor intrusion system, or a vapor barrier, that's development, but it also helps solve for the environmental. Hi. Brooklyn.
Hi, so you mentioned public funding vehicles. What kinds, can you think of any examples for disadvantaged communities or rural communities?
Dang it. Yes. Hang on. Let me cheat. That are specifically designed for those? So don't get too caught up in blue versus green on that. HCD has a lot of them. So that No Place Like Home and some of the others. There's a cattle port, so again, HCD has a veterans housing and homeless prevention program. There's a pre-development loan program out there for HCD. Look at those for sure, but I'll also give that some additional thought. Anybody else? Questions? Easier ones? Make me look good at the end? Yes. Can somebody throw a microphone toward her direction? Yes, and in fact, it works better digitally, and it will as it gets unwieldy because you'll be able to sort on it. Let me talk to Claire right behind you and see Claire, and we'll figure out how to make it available to the masses as well as the presentation itself. In the meantime, all you have to do is send me a note, and I'll send it along, or Dana. Anybody else? Yes?
Question about EIFDs for brownfield redevelopment.
Yes.
Can it be used to clean up privately owned properties or only public?
That's a great question. I'm going to let you answer it, and then I'm going to answer it generically for Tiff. Go.
I mean, as long as you can get access, the money could be used for that. You're triggering prevailing wage, though, so that's a thing to keep in mind. The question was about whether or not you could use the IFDs to fund cleanup on privately owned properties, and the answer is yes, but it does often trigger prevailing wage.
When I was a redeveloper, every tax increment financing deal, and EIFD is just a version of it, was for properties that I owned, so they were privately owned. I did a deal in Denver. It was a former tire manufacturing company called Gates, and it was, at the time, one of the most contaminated privately owned pieces of property in all of Colorado, and I acquired it from Gates Corporation after a couple failed attempts, and I did a partnership with the city in Denver and ended up getting $84 million TIF project to help pay for cleanup and demolition like we talked about, and infrastructure and a whole bunch of other things. So that was a pretty good example of that. Other questions? Comments? Okay, I think we might have finished a little early. Feel free to go get a drink, and I'm going to take a breath, but I'm going to hang out here if you want to chat amongst yourselves, or come talk to any of the facilitators or myself. We'll hang out for a little while. If not, we'll be here for the next couple days and find us. So I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you.